here today participating. It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Can I just interject something? This quote in the first edition did not include breathed by the creator. So in the second through, I think, the sixth editions of The Origin of Species, he added that, possibly expressing his own personal ambivalence or fear of misinterpretation of the various responses that could be given to the scientific work.
That's a very good point.
Okay. So we're going to start with our discussion. I have a couple of questions, and afterwards we're going to have a Q&A. So if you guys want to get in on this, go right ahead. So first of all, creationism. Can you explain that a bit, and why is it not accepted as valid science?
Well, I can explain it from the standpoint in philosophy. William Paley was an 18th century English theologian who came up with some famous arguments for the existence of God that have come down to be known as the design arguments. And basically, let me give the simplest version of this. Paley suggested if you were walking in a deserted area and you found a pocket watch, and you'd never seen a pocket watch before, you didn't have wristwatches or iPods back then, but we could give similar arguments today. You see this object and you look at it, you open it up, and if you've ever opened up a pocket watch, they have very elaborate mechanisms in them. And so you'd be struck by the complexity, by the parts moving together for some purpose. Maybe you wouldn't know what the purpose is, but you would draw the conclusion that there was an intelligent designer of this object. And what Paley then, and he used similar examples of the eye, the complexity of the eye. Modern versions of this talk about the blood clotting system. And so the idea is that you have some complex system, and it has an irreducible complexity that can't be explained apart from an intelligent being who designed it. So look at the universe as a whole, planet Earth. It's a kind of an ecological argument for the existence of God based on the complexity of all living things or of parts of the body or even of things like watches. Of course, there are problems with this kind of argument philosophically. It doesn't really deal with the problem of evil adequately. And Darwin initially, as a young man, was impressed by Paley's argument. He actually roomed at Cambridge in the same room that William Paley had roomed in when he was a student at Cambridge. So he had this personal connection, came from a devout family, which was also, maybe we'll get to this, abolitionists. They were anti-slavery, and he was steeped in this perspective of hatred for slavery, and that very much influenced his later thinking. But Paley's argument is interesting philosophically. It didn't reflect, well, you could say it did reflect the good science of the time, but it doesn't reflect any longer advances in science that Darwin himself contributed to. It doesn't deal adequately with the problem of evil or suffering. Is the universe actually so orderly, so harmonious as Paley thought? Darwin was troubled by that. Darwin's turn away from Paley's arguments and his ambivalence about belief in God very much relate to the problem of evil and suffering, the death of his young daughter Annie. So there's a philosophical argument behind this. The science of creationism, I think Mark can take up the contemporary versions of creationism or intelligent design.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with what Ted said. And those are the basics of Paley and of course, the ramifications. The design thing that's most exploited by Paley, the intelligent design approach, can maybe go back to Aquinas and, in a sense, his design model. It may be somebody else as well, but the idea that there's this design, and something that was very impressive for Charles Darwin. He's a very religious man and religious family, and of course very much favored William Paley's writing in natural theology and so forth. But that whole design argument about perfection and all this kind of stuff is crushed when Darwin himself, through his own experiments, sees that there's not perfection in nature. Nature just is. It's not a matter of perfection. So you find that there are compromises. I like to say duct tape and smoke and whatever. And this is something that Darwin would call tinkering and so forth. So basically you're making the best you can with what's available. You get home tonight, one of the examples I like to use for my students, and you open the fridge up, and whatever's in there, if you have nothing else in the cupboard, you don't feel like going out, and you are going to eat, and it's going to be food, we'll narrow that down, you're going to eat what's in there. And you might make some really interesting concoctions. When I was a kid, I don't know about you guys, but I made some very weird things that I mixed together. But when you're hungry and you're creative, what the heck? And that's what evolution is. When you look at the design of the eye, as you talked about, you look at the shattering of light as it comes into the retina, you look at the fact that the wiring is at the back of the brain instead of the front, and many other factors. I mean, our backs are designed for good bipedalism for a limited amount of time with some stress incurred. These are all physiological, mechanical things, which if you were going to make it perfect, then everything would be perfect in every situation. And if you look at bodily systems for us and grasshoppers and oak trees and the rest, it's not perfection. It's not. It is elegant and beautiful in its own way, but perfection is something that's not. And so design that comes from intelligent design is that part of the argument, which is the kind of base point is removed. Another thing to think about on the modern side of this is intelligent designers, as they call themselves, IDs, see themselves as not creationist. Creationism has been around for many, many, many centuries, thousands of years, arguably, if we go back to, at least in the Abrahamic tradition anyway, but this spreads across other cultures as well. Believing in creation is not unique to the Abrahamics, but we're looking at that because science and anthropology and biology all grew up within the Western tradition. And when we look at intelligent design, they say, well, we're not talking about creationism or God. We're saying a supernatural being of some massive power, and so forth and so on, created everything. But we're not calling him God or her God. Well, then you're just leaving out the name. It's like saying, I describe everything about Ted, but say his name, right? And I'm pointing to him and everything, and I don't say his name. We know what it is. It is what it is. And so they're doing that. You say, why would they do that? What's the story? Because they wanted to put creationism in intelligent design, which is kind of just a wolf in sheep's clothing, I guess. They wanted to get it ready so that you could take it in and show it as science. It is and that you could test it. By the way, testability on this is, for showing the existence of God, is not there at all. And the opposite is true, that if you want to test against this in science and say, let's look for imperfection in biology, it's everywhere. So good luck with that. So they put themselves in a really, really lousy place. It doesn't seem to make much sense. But remember that this is coming from a religious point of view, and religious point of views are very different than science. Science needs evidence. It needs to be able to, I should say, gather up evidence, test it, and do it in such a way with the scientific method, the modern scientific method, that can be repeated from place to place, person to person, across time. And you should get similar results. And religion doesn't have the same kind of, I should say, rigid formula. It's a very different thing altogether. Not that it's bad, it's just different.
Let me just piggyback one more time. A lot of the question has to do, is it ever appropriate to teach creationism or intelligent design in schools? And I would say yes, in philosophy or religion classes.
Yes.
Not in science classes. It's not science, it's philosophy, it's faith. And in that respect, it's perfectly legitimate. But it's not testable. The predictions that can be made are quite incorrect. The idea that the eye has irreducible complexity is just not true. You can see the evolution of the eye over the course of millions of years, from eye spots to more and more complex eyes until we get to the human eye. And so it's the claims of irreducible complexity that are often used by Paley through contemporary intelligent design advocates are just flat out wrong. And another example would be transitional fossils. It was claimed there are no transitional fossils between, say, reptiles and birds, or between fish and amphibians and mammals, and these have been discovered. So
we have these. So.
You have these.
So that's, yeah.
It's not good science. It doesn't mean, however, it shouldn't be taught in the appropriate setting. We need science as science, and in K through 12, we should have philosophy classes and religious studies classes, and there it's perfectly appropriate to talk about these issues. As we